Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar titled Grow Your Colocation ROI. My name is Mark Gatos. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Nlyte Software. We'd like to thank you for the time you're going to be spending with us. If you have any questions during this webinar, please feel free to submit them into chat. And we are fortunate today to have a guest speaker with us, Enzo Greco, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Nlyte. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the agenda. So today, let me just make sure we're all set here. So today, we're going to give you a really quick overview of who Nlyte is, and then I'm going to turn it over to Enzo Greco, who's our Chief Strategy Officer here at Nlyte, and he's going to take it from there, and he's going to talk about colocation trends, what is needed to remain relevant and competitive with your prospects and customers in the market. And then he'll talk about how Nlyte can improve the overall ROI for a colocation provider. And at the end, we'll take any Q&A we have. We have additional resources. But if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them into the chat box, and we will try to get to them all by the end of this webinar. And if we don't get to them during the live performance of the webinar, we will definitely get back to you. So if you have any questions, feel free to submit them there, and we'll try to get to them during the webinar or at the end of the webinar. So that's great. Next slide, please. So to give a real quick overview, Nlyte is the leading provider of data center infrastructure management solutions, right? We help companies save time, become more agile, and really increase the effectiveness and the impact of their computing infrastructure. And we've been in business for approximately 13 to 14 years. We have offices in North America, Europe, and in Asia. We're a privately held company. And as I mentioned before, we're one of the leaders in the DSIM market. In fact, in the most recent Gartner Magic Quadrant, there were three companies. There were three companies in the leadership quadrant. We were the only company who is a dedicated software-only company. It is all we focus on is this specific market. We're on the 9th generation of our technology. We take a very modular approach. You can start with a very specific portion of our solution and grow and increase the overall value you get from the solution by adding additional capabilities. We have a modern, sophisticated open architecture that allows us to connect into other systems, as well as a variety of pre-built connectors. And our solution is available either in the cloud as a SaaS solution or on premises. It's a very robust architecture. We support customers up to 150,000 racks. We have some companies using our solution as small as 25 racks. Our customers range across the world. We have over 300, I think closer to 350 customers, colocation providers, financial services companies, high tech. What they all have in common is that they use Nlyte to increase the effectiveness, the impact, and the ROI they get out of their computing infrastructure. And we do have a 98% customer retention rate. We're very proud of that. Companies use Nlyte, it works, and they continue to use us for years. And we have a variety of global partners listed down below. So that's sort of a high level of Nlyte. Obviously, you can go to nlyte.com and learn more if you're interested, but I want to turn it over. We're fortunate, as I mentioned before, to have a guest speaker today. We have Enzo Greco, who is our Chief Strategy Officer at Nlyte. I will turn it over to you, Enzo.
Mark, thank you very much, and certainly my thanks for everybody on the call for your attention and your time. So this is a great topic for us. Certainly it's a market we know well. We've had the luxury of working with many of the different colocation providers, from the large to the smaller, and their clients. And so we are delighted to put together some of our findings, some of our key trends and strategy, and share them with you today. And when we look at the colocation market, it's always hard to describe if you're not in that market. And one of the best analogies that I've learned, and that I think is very applicable and certainly we'll use throughout this presentation, is think of a mall. We're all familiar with the mall. And inside of a mall, what do you have? You have different stores. You have large stores. You have small stores. You may have stores within a store. So you may have a large anchor store like a Macy's, and within there, you may have a Starbucks. And if you are the owner of the mall, what's your responsibility? You need to provide to your tenants space, environmentals like cooling, building security, and similar. If you are the client of the mall, what do you expect? Exactly that. You expect the mall to provide you the security. You expect your store to have power. You expect overall air conditioning and similar environmentals. As the owner of the mall, you also need to optimize the usage of your space. You need to optimize how you sell it. You need to be able to predict what stores may or may not be in place a year from now. So it's a very, very applicable and apt model for what we're going to go through in this session. And before we go into some of the details within the mall, there certainly is a lot of growth in colos. We'll get to that in just a slide or two. But what's driving that? And this is a great view of user growth. And of course, user growth drives data growth, and data growth drives data center growth. And this is from January of last year. So the most recent the January of 2018 should be coming out within just a few weeks. But this company, Hootsuite, does a fantastic job of really analyzing the market. And this is the growth that they have seen over a 1 year period. And from 17 to 18 will be very similar. So tremendous growth, especially at the edge. So if you look at the mobile side, especially at the edge. And of course, edge traffic and edge data has its own characteristics. Data likes to live near its users, and data also benefits from being centralized. So all of that is playing into the growth of the data center market. So certainly there's a lot of user growth, driving data growth, driving data center growth. But what kind of data centers? So this is a very recent statistic, and I think all of us that are in the market have an appreciation for this. We certainly can attest to this. So the traditional data centers, the enterprise-owned data centers, certainly those new builds are decreasing, just about 6%. But new builds, primarily for service providers, are increasing by 24%. So service provider builds, these are either single-tenant or multi-tenant data centers, multi-tenant data centers. And that is where a lot of certainly the growth and the focus for this webinar is. And worldwide, and there's a very important trend here, so these are the different colocation data centers provided worldwide. And of course, the circles indicate the size of each of the market, but this is accurate as of January 3rd, so very accurate. And you can see that there is a swath worldwide of data centers. And of course, there's a really important aspect behind this that we'll also hit on the next slide. Globalization in the data center market, in the colo market, is very, very important. Because if your clients are global clients, you need to provide global facilities and global connectivity worldwide. There are several reasons for this. One of the most simple is there are now regulations in place, for example, that data must live where it was created. So in Europe, you can't serve Europe in many cases by a data center based in North America. The data center must physically be within the confines of the user base. So there is a tremendous worldwide growth in data centers, not concentrated in any particular area. And to emphasize that, we certainly live in a most dynamic market, and there's probably few markets more dynamic in data centers than the colo market. And if you look in here, so there are just about 1,200 providers worldwide, but certainly there's a lot of M&A. There is a lot of consolidation. There are some key buys, and some of them are interesting. So if you look at the Equinix acquisition of Iconic, what was interesting about that is expanding to the Iberian Peninsula, expanding to Spain and Portugal. Again, because of growth, because of new regulations. So if you look at all of the data center market, there's some real interesting, certainly it's a great market for its growth, but also for the different kind of providers that are in it. You certainly have the large providers, the DLRs and the Equinix, but there are so many smaller specialized providers that are really making a strong mark. So that's just a little bit of the background. Now, one of the keys when you have when you have so many providers, which truly in many cases are providing a commoditized offering or increasingly commoditized offering, they must be able to optimize and differentiate themselves. Of course, they need to optimize simply to remain competitive on a cost basis. They need to optimize to maximize their return on their investment. And if you think of the mall example, this is very much a real estate play. In fact, many of the colocation providers are organized as real estate trusts. So funds from operations and how they maximize cash flow is absolutely critical for the provider. So they need to optimize their costs, they need to optimize their operations, but they also need to differentiate themselves. If I am a client, I have now many options of providers. How do they differentiate themselves? And that is one of the biggest shifts that we have seen within the last 2 years. Rather than colo simply providing the envelope, let's say, simply providing the parking lot, the building of the mall, and the environmentals and power, now we're finding the colo providers providing a great deal more differentiation, such as remote visibility, remote management. So what I'd like to do in the next few slides is go through what some of those optimization and differentiation characteristics are with our specific experience that we've had in providing that kind of capability. So one of the first is, of course, we need to know what we have so we can sell it. Go back to the mall analogy. If I'm running a large mall, of course, I need to sell the space. Ideally, I should have no vacant space because that is immediately a missed revenue opportunity. So I have got to have very accurate views of what I have and what my salespeople can sell. Of course, not all space is created equal. I may have large space, I may have small space in a data center. There are some providers that sell at the rack level and even more granular at the slot level, at the server level, selling half racks and quarter racks. I need to have very good information so that my sales team can sell as effectively as possible. And of course, a key part of that is capacity planning. I need to know what I have today, what tenants I have today, but also a view into what my tenants will be in 3 months. What vacancy may I have 3 months from now, 6 months from now, perhaps a year from now, so I can plan and minimize my vacancy. Next one is power. Of course, if you are a tenant in a data center, there are a couple of key things the provider needs to give you. Certainly, security, on both at the building level as well as internally. For example, controlling access to an individual cage or space that you may have. But it also needs to provide environmentals, and it needs to provide power and connectivity. Those are the key assets. Those are the key functions which you expect as a client of a colo provider. So on the power side, you need that power to be as clean and reliable as within your own data center, or even better. So knowing the quality of power, the availability, and in fact, there are many SLAs that are tied to availability, that are tied to quality. So being able to monitor your power and predict power usage is a very important facet, both for the provider as well as for the client. And closely tied with power is cooling. It's the other side of environmentals. So again, within a mall, within my small store, within the mall, for example, I don't have my own dedicated air conditioning system on the roof. You are providing that to me as the mall operator. The same is true within a colo center. So there is the envelope providing perhaps building cooling or room level cooling. I may also have more precision cooling, such as rack cooling, but I need to, as the provider of the facility, I need to optimize this in particular, because as we all know, cooling and thermal management is the single largest operating cost within a data center. So being able to optimize that cost is key. Being able to report on cooling back to my clients, that's usually part of the SLA, and being able to just predict the kind of cooling and being able to perhaps pre-cool areas, that's very important as well. So cooling, key part of environmentals. And of course, as customers come in and out of my data center, they move. They need to move equipment. They need to move their own racks in and out. So I need to have a very good mechanism for how customers can do these migrations, how they can do these consolidations within their data center. And of course, this capability is critical to the customer, because when they move equipment into a data center, they'll be very selective, certainly about what they move in, how they move it, and that's a perfect time for consolidations. But for us as a colo provider, for example, this migration and consolidation is important for us, because this directly affects the kind of space that we have, the vacancies that we may experience in the future. So the whole planning aspect behind migration and consolidations is very important to the colo provider. And if we then look at operationally, so you are a mall operator, there's a lot that goes on. You have new clients coming in, you have former clients leaving, you have billing operations that often can be quite complicated. You need to automate that. And of course, one of the best ways of doing that is to have workflow management. Now, every provider works slightly different, so the workflow management system must be flexible to accommodate that. It has to be flexible so that the service provider quite easily can customize and accommodate their different business models. But also, it is very common for different tenants, especially large tenants that go into a colo center, to have their own requirements. They may have their own reporting requirements. They may have their own mechanisms, for example, for reporting on alerts or alarms. And you need to have that flexibility to accommodate the different tenants. And again, looking at the nature of the market, which is becoming increasingly commoditized, we need to differentiate. The colo providers need to differentiate themselves. And what we are seeing is that there is a very strong shift towards providing this kind of customization to their clients by the colo providers. So workflow management, and of course, the more that we can automate, especially within the context of a data center, the more important it is. And SLAs. We all know the importance of SLAs within our own data centers, and these become even more important when I am taking my critical applications and placing them with a different provider. So in truth, what I am really doing is I am managing my my hosted data center via SLAs. Since I am not the operator, let's say I'm the client, I am not the operator any longer of my own data center. I am totally reliant on the SLAs to make assumptions about where my applications run. I am totally reliant on the SLAs to know the quality and the availability of the environment. So SLAs are critically important. In fact, as we all know, they are often a key part of any client acquisition. They are a key part for the clients themselves to determine which data center provider to choose. And they need to be reported on. So I need to know as the client what kind of power, what kind of thermal, what kind of availability did the data center have? And of course, these are often tied to contractual terms. So being able to manage and report on the SLAs is very important. Not just the management, but also the reporting of it. And often these reports are quite customized. And again, many of those are contractual. So that's the importance of SLA management. And of course, no colo provider is in business as a charity. It needs to charge for its services, and it needs to charge in both accurately, but often the different chargeback mechanisms change dramatically. Perhaps, certainly we've seen some colo providers that charge by power. There are some interesting models where colos charge by power capacity rather than power consumed. You may charge purely on square foot. You may charge based on global footprint, which does not take into account individual colo centers, but rather the global footprint. All of that needs to be managed, and it needs to be accurately, and that's a key, needs to be accurately charged back, which means we need to have both visibility and management per client, per data center, whatever the metric is. We need to have the management and the measurement to be able to accurately charge back. Whether you are charging per kilowatt hours used per rack, whether you are charging a fixed rate, it needs to be very clear, it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be reported. And then, of course, you need the whole workflow around this and the integration that perhaps ties in with the appropriate billing system. Whatever you may use needs to tie in with the appropriate general ledger system, accounts receivable, and so forth. So this is the importance of chargeback. And this is, of course, very much tied to the whole business arrangement that you may have. So that is so what we've gone through is the growth of data centers, the importance of colo providers in particular. We've looked at some of the dynamics that are becoming prevalent in the market, especially the wealth of providers, the globalization. And with that comes a need to optimize and differentiate. And we saw 7 key ways of optimizing and differentiating for the colo provider. That is the end of my session, and certainly we have a great, I will hand it back to Mark for next steps of questions and comments.
Okay, great. So thank you. And so as we had mentioned before, if you have any questions, we have a little bit of time here at the end of the webinar. I want to thank Enzo for the presentation. We have a variety of assets, case studies, data sheets, and videos, and so forth from colocation, about colocation providers, or from colocation providers in the case of videos. So if you're interested in more information, we have it out there on Nlyte.com. And as I mentioned, we do have some questions that came in. Here's one question from Rick. This one comes in almost every webinar. We should just sort of plan to cover it in every webinar, which is, how is Nlyte priced? Nlyte prices by value. On the more macro, I like to give the answer that on a macro scale, we only want to charge people for the value we're providing. And so in the co-location space, we're usually going off the size of the environment that we are assisting an organization with. So that is done on a points basis. We have the flexibility of doing a perpetual license or doing a subscription. When it comes to our pricing, we're extremely flexible and work with our customers. So again, it's done on a value basis, but in the co-location space, it's really how large that environment is, and that's done on a points basis again. And then, of course, as you expect, the larger you start getting greater discounts as you get a larger and larger footprint. So that's pricing. The next question is actually from Sal, and it says, why wouldn't I build this myself? That is an option. Enzo, you can give your thoughts. I certainly think you'll have some thoughts on this also, but I would say every customer Nlyte has, co-location providers, some of the largest organizations in the world could certainly do this. They have technical staffs, and some of them have, in fact, built it first, and then that hasn't worked out, and they've come to Nlyte. I would say that this is what we do. It is our focus, which means we get to improve the solution via the best practices we learn from all the organizations we work with who are constantly pushing us. We have some of the 4 or 5 horsemen, depending on how you want to count them, using our solutions. So we are being pushed to the limit to increase the capabilities of this solution constantly. So in buying a solution from a company like Nlyte, from a provider, you're getting an investment that continues to increase in value, while typically if you're not in the software business, when you deploy your own solution, yes, you can customize it to your specific needs, but you could lose those developers. How do you get input on things going on in the industry? There's a much greater ROI, and we actually have information at Nlyte on that very topic. Did you want to add anything, Enzo, about building your own solution?
I'll just add one point, which is it may be viable to focus on one of these features. Let's just pick space management. But if you look at everything that should be provided, such as environmental control, one of the biggest is integration with systems such as SAP and Siebel, for example, for customer management or billing. That becomes extremely difficult, and few providers that we are aware of do software at that level. Perhaps they have their own internal solutions just for space management, very specific point solutions, but rarely does any colo provider that we are aware of provide the breadth of capabilities you see here.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add is, because we are not an island unto ourselves, meaning when you deploy a solution, you typically are going to want to tie it into other systems, whether those are BMS systems or ITSM systems or virtualization. Who knows what you're going to tie in? You might tie into a financial system. We have pre-built connectors that allow you to do this easily. And then as there are changes in the systems on both sides, we update those connectors. So in a way, this is sort of a good analogy for overall building your own solution, right? We take care of all the maintenance. We take care of moving the bar on the solution where you don't. And additionally, we've got probably more engineers we can place on the task than virtually any co-location provider, because this is all we do. So we have a large set of engineers across the world working on a variety of different elements, as well as our whole organization is dedicated to it. So I think there's a great ROI for buying software and configuring it for your specific purposes. So we've come to the 30-minute top of the 30 minutes that we usually like these webinars to go. We had a few more questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them. We will get to them offline. I do want to thank everyone who was on the webinar. So thank you very much. And I want to thank Enzo Greco for being our guest speaker. Thank you very much, Enzo.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all.
Sure. And so I am shutting down this webinar at this time. So thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Thank you.